Welcome, subscribers. We are speaking with Ralph Ellis, and we are going to continue our discussion. Excellent material from Ralph Ellis. We've been speaking about his research and his work and his books and so forth, and I want to continue talking a little bit more about Cleopatra and Scota and that series, two-part book series that he got there. But before we go there, I was fascinated when Ralph brought up the information regarding Solomon in his book, Solomon Falcon of Sheba, that he's going to rename to Solomon Pharaoh of Egypt. And I've been fascinated by the mythology and so forth surrounding King Solomon, but also Hiram Abiff that you mentioned, because this has connections with masonry. But maybe you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, well, it is it's a fascinating and frustrating part of theological history, because yet again we have this era that is not there in the historical record. Here we have King Solomon and King David and the Queen of Sheba, who were the most famous monarchs in the whole of this region, in the whole of this era. We're talking about vastly wealthy monarchs, and other monarchs came from all over the region in order to pay tribute to King Solomon and King David. Now, that means they were in a position of power. You don't come and pay tribute. This is not giving gifts to a friend. Tribute is a way of preventing a powerful king from attacking your nation. You are a subject of that king almost if you're paying tribute. And people were paying tribute to King Solomon. So these were very powerful, very influential people. Mm. And they are missing from the historical record. Now, how can this be? How can we have this history? This is why some people, of course, have started saying that, it's all mythology. Someone made all this up.
Sure.
But I don't believe this. And the Israelites, the Israelis, now have the opportunity. They got back their homeland in 47, 48, and they finally established themselves. And so they said, okay, archaeologists, now's your chance. Off you go. Go and find the evidence, of our great history.
Sure.
And so off they went. And much to their annoyance, they can't find it. So, and they've gone quite the other way. Finkelstein has said that Jerusalem was only a village in this era. We're talking about 950, 1000 BC, something of that nature, for the United Monarchy. And Jerusalem was only a village. So we have no evidence of the palaces, we have no evidence of the city, and we have no written or scribal evidence that they ever existed. Nobody can find a monument with, King David did this on it. King Solomon did that, They don't exist. So how can this be? Well, you've only got two options. One is that the naysayers are correct, and this is all mythology, and someone made it all up. Kings do not exist. Well, that's one possibility. But the other possibility is we're looking in the wrong place. And so I'd just been through, 3 books already that were looking at the history of the Israelites and putting the history of the Israelites back into Egypt. So what's the obvious thing to do? Well, the obvious thing to do is put the history of King David and King Solomon back into Egypt and see if you can find it there. Maybe we're looking in the wrong location. So we've got the right date, the right region, but we're looking in the wrong location. And I found something that was very interesting. The first thing I found was that we're looking for, say, King David. You're not going to find King David, otherwise someone would have found that name somewhere. So what I started looking for is attributes. And the main attributes for King David were the city and the star. The city of David and the star of David. So I started looking for those attributes, and I went down into the pharaonic history of Lower Egypt, what used to be the Hyksos lands. And there happened to be a pharaoh Pasibakahayanut, or Susens they call him in the Greek.
Mm-hmm.
And Pasibakahayanut was known for the star and the city. That's what his name means. My star that rises in my city. Bit strange that, isn't it? Okay, so here we have a pharaoh, a king of Egypt, who was known for a star and a city. And of course, these kings, these monarchs, actually became quite influential, not only in Lower Egypt, but also in Upper Egypt, and also in Syria and Palestine. So they were actually king of Palestine, king of Israel, but of course he didn't live in Jerusalem, in Israel. He actually lived, of course, in Lower Egypt. He lived in Tanis. And it so happened, of course, that Tanis has the same name as Jerusalem. Jerusalem was known as Zion. That's why we have the Zionists looking for the homeland. But the name of Tanis in the Bible is Zoan. It's got the same name. So there's a lot of room for confusion. So what I had to do, of course, is look a bit closer at this. And so I just looked at the two king lists, basically. I mean, they weren't actually kings at that point, but the ancestors of King David were obviously princely, otherwise he wouldn't have become a king. And it so happens that his ancestors seem to match up quite well with the ancestors of Susens, the Egyptian pharaoh. For instance, from the Bible we get Amannabdab. That's one of the ancestors of King David. And from the king list of Egypt we get, apologies for these names, but they're not easy, Amennezbanabjed. So Amennabjed and Amennezbanabjed. Bit the same? And from the Bible again we get Nashon, and from Egyptian history, Amenemnashu. From biblical history we get Salmon, and from Egyptian history, Siamon. And then we get Boaz, and Boaz Sorkon. And then we get Obed, and Amenemobed. And then we come down to King David. So we've already had a list of kings and ancestors that seems remarkably familiar. And so I then took it obviously down into the court of King David, because what I'm saying here is obviously that King David and this particular pharaoh, Pasibakahayanut, are the same person. But if that's so, then everything about them would have to match. The whole of their court, the courtiers, the descendants, the ancestors, the people who worked in the court would all have to match. And strangely enough, they seem to do that. So, for instance, if we look at one of the daughters, now the daughter of one of the daughters of King David was Makara Mutemhat, which is quite a complicated name, to try and mimic. Makara Mutemhat. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself.
Okay.
One of the daughters of King David was called Makatema. But the name of the Egyptian pharaoh was Makara Mutemhat. Makatema, Makara Mutemhat. It's the same name.
Sure, yeah.
The army commander of King David was called Joab, very famous army commander. And the army commander of this Egyptian pharaoh was called Joabinjed. Joab and Joabinjed. And most interesting of all, from Masonic history, of course, the architect that was used by King David and King Solomon was called Hiram Abiff. Now, people who are not involved in masonry won't really know that name. But within masonry, the hero of masonry is not a king or a queen, or a god, or anything of that nature, the hero of Masonry is Hiram Abiff, an architect, which I suppose you might expect, for a cult that is based on Masonry, architecture.
Sure, yeah.
So the main hero is Hiram Abiff, and he was the architect of King David and King Solomon. But the architect of this Egyptian pharaoh was called Herumatif.
All right, yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah, very fascinating.
Yeah.
But it's by putting it back into Egypt and finding this similarity between these people, we suddenly turn this mythical Bible, which everyone is well, many people now are saying is mythology because they can't find these people. So it's based on faith, because none of it can be found in the historical record. But now suddenly we are placing it back into the historical record and finding real people and real characters. And not only that, but their city, their temple, their tombs, their mummies, their death masks. So we have a real united monarchy, and we can start to find out more about these people. I mean, just in Hiram Abiff, nobody knows what his name means. But of course, if you go back into the Egyptian history, we do know what his name means. It's not Hiram Abiff, it's Herum Abiff, or Atif. And in the Egyptian, Heru is Horus, the falcon-headed god. Is just a linking word, meaning my, or something of that nature. So the actual name is Heru Atif, and Atif means son of, or is my father, basically. So it's a standard name that you'd always get in Egypt, where you have a god name as your father.
Sure.
So like Tuthmosis means Thoth is my father.
Yeah.
Moses means the